Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Mukham karoti vachanam, pangam langyate gire, yatkrpatamaham vande, Shri Gurudinataranam, Paramanandam Madhavam. Hare Krishna, thank you so much for joining in our discussion on the Bhagavatam. So, last discussion we completed chapter 27 of fourth canto, which was the attack of Chandve on the city of King Puranjan. And this essentially, the allegory denotes the influence of time on the material body. So the city of King Puranjan, as we said, is the city of 9 gates, or the body in which the jiva lives. Chandvik represents time. Kalkanya represents jara or old age. So the attack of time is relentless. It happens all the time, but in the earlier, when in youth, the life years, which is donated by the 5-headed serpents, which are the 5 life years, they protect the city, allowing the jiva to enjoy. And but as time goes on, the attack by the 360 Gandharvas and Gandharvis, which are essentially days and nights, and the attacks by his 3 main associates, which are the 3 kinds of disease. Well, Prajwar is actually the final the final sickness that comes before the time of death. And in this way, King Puranjan is attacked by Chandveg and Kalkanya and Prajwara. So in the 28th chapter, we will discuss the result of the attack, the first 27 verses, which is essentially the death of Puranjan, or the death of the jiva, and then his rebirth. The soul being eternal, when he dies, he takes birth again as Vaibhava, and he marries a great personality by the name of Malayadhwaja. And as a chaste wife, Puranjan, he serves Malayadhwaj. And eventually, Vaibhava, she follows Malayadhwaj when he retires. So Malayadhwaj is the symbolically representing the spiritual master. So Puranjan then is taking shelter of a bona fide spiritual master. And then under the guidance of the spiritual master, Puranjan as Vaibhava then perfects his spiritual life. And the chapter concludes with instructions for a disciple by Narad Muni, and instruction by Avigyat to Vaibhava. So Avigyat, who had appeared right at the beginning as the super soul, the instruction essentially by Krishna to Vaibhava. Okay, so we will start with the first verse. Let's see if somebody, Saran Prabhu, maybe can you read the translations after I read the verse? Okay, thank you. Verse 1. Naraduvacha Sanika Bayanamno Ye Barishmandishtakaranaha Prajvarakala-kanyabhyam Vicherur-avanimimam.
The great sage Narada continued, "My dear King Prajnabharat, afterward, the king of the Yavana, whose name is fear itself, as well as Prajvara, Kanya, and his soldiers began to travel all over the world.
So the 28th chapter describes the initial section of the chapter describes the leaving of the body by the soul when the body has become uninhabitable because of the attacks, by by time, by fear of death, by old age, and by diseases. So Yavan Raj is essentially the embodiment of Bhaya or Mrityu, and they're used synonymously. And his soldiers are diseases, which we have said were of three kinds: Adhyatmik, Adhidevik, and Adhibhautik. Kalkanya is Jara or old age, and Prajwar is fever. Right? So this will be discussed in the first 24 verses. Verses 25 to 27 will talk about Puranjan being taken to the abode of Yamraj. So Prabhupada says that the period of life just prior to death is certainly very dangerous, because usually at this time people are attacked by the weakness of old age as well as many kinds of diseases. The diseases that attack the body are compared here to soldiers. These soldiers are not ordinary soldiers, for they are guided by the king of Yavanas, who acts as their commander-in-chief. The word Dishtakarana indicates that he is their commander. Right? So the commander is death. And under the command are many soldiers which are diseases. So generally speaking, the body is the approach of death is looked upon by diseases appearing in the body. So just like when the general attacks, his soldiers will first attack, and then the general will come and complete the attack. So before the coming of death, diseases come. Before the coming of diseases, old age comes. So first Kalkanya comes, then the soldiers of Yavan Raj comes, and then Yavan comes, and all this is happening under the influence of time. Okay, verse 2. Taikada Turabasha Puranjan Purim Nripa Rurudhu Dhoma Bhogadhyam Jaratpanna Palitam. Sorry, I forget. Please go ahead.
Once the dangerous soldiers attacked by the city of Puranjana with great force. Although the city was full of paraphernalia for self-gratification, it was being protected by the old serpent.
So the serpent is the life force. So Narad Muni says that the city was full of paraphernalia for sense gratification, which means that all the senses were fully active, even though Puranjan was old, even though the life hairs were old. But still, the senses are still as active in seeking engagement. So Prabhupada makes some very relevant points in the purport. He says that as one's body engages in sense gratification, it becomes weaker and weaker daily. And then finally, the life hairs become so weak that they become compared to a weak serpent. So the purpose of the life hair is to protect the body from diseases. And when the life hairs become weak, then the body is ravaged by various diseases. So according to the Vedic system, before coming to such a stage, one should leave home and take sannyas. So the reason Prabhupada is making this point is because sannyas is an age of, is the stage of, or rather the phase of renunciation. So the point that he has made is that sense gratification weakens the life years. Now, when one is of that age, then the life years are already weakened by a lifetime of sense gratification. That cannot be reversed. But one can slow it down by now refusing to indulge in sense gratification. But Prabhupada says, unfortunately, at the present time, even the oldest man in the family does not leave home, being attracted by wife, children, money, opulences, dwelling, etc. Right? So we see that in case of the Thrasht, that he was old. Not only was he old, he was not very much respected. So this happens by the course of, by the nature of time. That as one becomes older, then one becomes less and less respected if the person is living in an attached manner. However, if the person is living in a renounced manner, even though he may not have taken sannyas or left the house and gone to the forest, but if the person is living in a renounced manner, then as he becomes older, the respect for him grows more and more. The Narad Muni makes this point with the Thrush that you are attached to being the king or all the paraphernalia of the king, and you're living like a dog that is living on the remnants given by Bhima. Right? So he's pointing to the fact that how he had lost our respect. And Narad Muni, I'm sorry, not Narad Muni, Vidura, he's not saying that whimsically. In the Mahabharata, factually, it is indicated that Bhima, even though there was enough Vedic culture at the time that he did not insult him on face, but he would indirectly insult Dhritarashtra very often. They just said that when he knew that Dhritarashtra was within hearing range, then he would strike his arms with a loud resounding sound and say, behold these arms that have slain the 100 Kurus. Understand, essentially the sons of Dhritarashtra, right? Or he would slap his thigh and say, this is how I killed the evil Duryodhana. And then at that time, Dhritarashtra, he would breathe fire of regret and of being disrespected, but he continued to stay. So same thing happens in the current day and time also. That when old people continue to stay in the house, if they are staying very much attached to the material conception, then even though the children may be pious or the children may be well situated, by nature of the existence, the person begins to lose his standing and the respect that he draws. The Prabhupada continues saying that in this way, a man usually thinks of his wife before death and becomes a woman in his next life. And then women become men. Prabhupada quotes, Yam Yam Vapis Bhavam. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, in this chapter, the acceptance of a woman's body by King Puranjan will be thoroughly explained. Okay. So moving on to verse 3. Kalakanya Pibubuje Puranjan Purambala Yaya Bihi Bhutah Purusha Sadhyo Nihe Saratamya. Gradually, I'm sorry, Prabhu, I have to get out of that habit. My apologies.
Gradually, Kalakanya, with the help of dangerous soldiers, attacked all the inhabitants of Puranjana city and thus rendered them useless for all the purposes.
So this verse talks in greater details about the destruction of the body by old age and diseases. So Prabhupada comments on the dangers of excessive sense gratification. He continues the theme that he builds in the previous age. So now, with old age, inevitably the body weakens. But that weakening is greatly accentuated by excessive sense gratification. And there is empirical proof for it. Like people who indulge too much into eating or sleeping or mating, or who are very, very passionate, they die young, or they have numerous diseases in their old age, even if they are opulent, and they may have the best medical resources, but still they have so many challenges. I remember once we were at a house of an industrialist in Delhi named Daulatram, and a very rich person. He had a college. He had started a college in Delhi. So my parents had gone to talk to him in that respect, and he was at that time, I'm guessing he was probably in his 80s. And I remember, and still in that conversation, he mentioned that I eat my food in silver utensils, but essentially the food is nothing but what the people on the street eat. So he was drinking the water strained from dal because his digestion was very, very weak, or he was eating a little bit of raw spinach and a little bit of fruits. So even though he was so rich that he could obviously afford to eat opulently, but he could not, he did not say because it was his life of excessive sense gratification, but obviously reaching the position that he had reached, his life was definitely one that was full of passion. So Prabhupada also makes the statement that the gender of the progeny is determined by the relative vital strengths of the parents. So if the vital strength of the father is more, it results in a son, and if the mother is more, it results in a daughter. And the Prabhupada says that the reason in the current day and age there are more female progenies than men is because the men are very early on in their life getting absorbed in excessive sense gratification. So they're becoming weak. And then Prabhupada in the purport, fairly long purport, he writes about what the Vedic solution is. So Prabhupada says that that the Vedic training dictates that a person or a man, right from the childhood, is trained in brahmacharya. And brahmacharya means that being engaged in the service of the Lord and strict celibacy. Once a devotee in Chopati temple was humorously commenting. So there is the famous brahmachari program over there. And he says, actually, this is not a brahmachari program. This is an adult reform program. Because the brahmachari program starts from the time that the child is 5 years old. Whereas our brahmacharis, they're mostly they join in the in the 20s. So it's not really a brahmachari program, it's adult reform program. The Prabhupada mentioned that the brahmachari program starts right from childhood, and they are trained in these two things, in celibacy and in service to the Lord, which is mostly swadhyaya, mostly study of the scriptures. Then when the brahmachari becomes a young man, then between the ages of 20 and 25, he marries a suitable bride. And because he has properly been nourished, he can immediately beget strong, healthy healthy sons. So then Prabhupada makes this point that thus it is essential to practice the system of brahmacharya if one wishes to beget a male child when one is married. Then he says that when one reaches the age of 50, he should give up family life. The husband and wife may then go abroad. Abroad, in this context, doesn't mean like they go to foreign countries, but abroad means that they leave home and they essentially go on a tirtha yatra. So at this age, they travel to the different places of pilgrimage. And by, they lose their attachment for family and home. So at this time, the wife leaves the husband, returns home under the care of the grown-up children, but remains aloof from family affairs. Right? So that there is no contention between the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Right? And the husband, he takes sannyas. He takes the sannyas ashram to serve the personality of God. And Prabhupada said this is the perfect system of civilization. The human form of life is specially meant for God realization. If one is unable to take to the process of Krishna consciousness from the very beginning of life, he must be trained to accept these principles at the fag end of life. And Prabhupada uses, now remember this is English from the 60s and the 50s. So Prabhupada uses the word, the principles at the fag end of life. So fag at that point, the colloquial meaning of fag was exhausted, when the life is completely exhausted. Later on, it became a slang to talk about people, generally to talk about gay men. It is a derogatory slur that is used for gay men. That happened maybe somewhere around the 80s. But if you read Prabhupada's purports and speeches, you see him use that word. And this is essentially British English that was dominant at that time. And Prabhupada concludes that unfortunately there is no training even in childhood, nor can one give up his family life even at the end. This is the situation with the city of Puranjan, figuratively described in these verses. Okay, moving on to verse 4. Tayupabhyu jamanam vai yavana sarvato disham dvarvi pravishya subrisham prardhyan sakalam purim.
When Kalakanya, daughter of time, attacked the body, the dangerous soldiers of the king of the Yavana enters the city through different gates. They then began to give severe trouble to all citizens.
So Vishwanath Chakravarti Pad, commenting on this verse, he says that the diseases enter through the eyes and the other openings. It's a little interesting. Generally, you would expect the disease to enter through either the mouth or the nose. either through when one breathes in or one eats. Krishna Chakravarti says that he talks about, he doesn't explain much more about it. He says that generally they enter through the eyes. Prabhupada says that the diseases manifest in these gates. So he says that when the body is attacked by the diseases, then they first begin to show up in these 9 gates, which means that one's eyes become weak, one's breathing becomes difficult, etc., etc. The Prabhupada says the body has 9 gates. When one is harassed by the invalidity of old age, various diseases manifest at the gates of the body. The eyes become so dim that one requires spectacles. The ear becomes too weak to hear directly, and therefore one requires hearing aids. The nostrils are blocked by mucus, and one has to always sniff a medicinal bottle called ammonia. Similarly, the mouth, too weak to chew, requires false teeth. The rectum also gives one trouble, and the evacuation process becomes difficult. Sometimes one has to take enemas and sometimes use a surgical nozzle to accelerate the passing of urine. And this way, the city of Puranjan was attacked at the various gates by the soldier. Thus, in old age, all the gates of the body are blocked by so many diseases, and one has to take help from them, from so many medicines and surgical appliances. So one can also understand when Vishwanath Chakravarti said diseases enter through ears by combining it with Prabhupada's explanation that generally the first thing to go is eyesight. So when he says that diseases enter through the ears, then he means that one's eyes first become weak. At the time of Vishwanath Chakravarti Pad, I'm not sure. I think there were spectacles at that time. The spectacles have been around for a long time. So they were probably spectacles at the time, but then there was cataract, etc., which at that time were not considered to be operable. Okay, so moving on to verse 5. Tasyam prapidyamanayam abhimani puranjana avapuru vedam stapan kutumbi mamata kulaha.
When the city was thus endangered by the soldiers and Kalakanya, King Puranjana, being overly absorbed in affection for his family, was placed in difficulty by the attacks of Yavanaraj and Kalakanya.
So Prabhupada writes that when we refer to the body, then we refer to the gross body as well as the subtle body. And in old age, both the gross and the subtle body become weak. So definitely the mind and intelligence become weak. So even personally, I experienced that, like things like memorizing verses, maybe 20, 25 years ago, if it would take me a day, now it takes me a week. And then I forget also, despite that. So mind becomes weak, intelligence becomes weak, and perhaps ego also becomes weak, maybe in some cases, maybe not, but definitely mind and intelligence. So Prabhupada continues that the proprietor of the body, the living soul, becomes very sad at not being able to use the field of activities properly. Right? So this is the Prabhupada referring to Kshetra and Kshetragya, that the soul is the Kshetragya and the body is the Kshetra. And Prabhupada says that when the Kshetra or the field is overgrown with thorns and weeds, it becomes very difficult for the owner to work it. So similarly, when the body is overcome by diseases, it is very difficult for the soul to derive any enjoyment from it. verse 6. Kanyopagudanashtashihi krapano vishayatmakaha nashtapragyo hitteshwaryo gandharva yavanir bala.
When King Puranjana was embraced by Kalakanya, he gradually lost all his beauty. Having been too much addicted to sex, he became very poor in intelligence and lost all his opulence. Being bereft of all possessions, he was conquered forcibly by the Gandharvas and the Yavanas.
So as we discussed that Kalkanya is old age. And Kalkanya embracing Puranjan is essentially the jiva becoming old. So Prabhupada says that when a person is attacked by the invalidity of old age and is still addicted to sense gratification, he gradually loses all personal beauty, intelligence, and good possessions. He thus cannot resist the forceful attack of the daughter of time. So, too much addiction to sense gratification results in nashta pragya. Nashta pragya means bereft of intelligence, and hrita aishwarya, which is bereft of opulence. So, it's interesting to note that Narad Muni and Prabhupada, they are not really considering old age to be the cause of, or the singular cause of all this debilitation. Essentially, what they are saying is that because of addiction to sense gratification, old age has all these consequences. So the flip side of it is that those who are not addicted to sense gratification will not suffer all these results of old age. So when it is mentioned that devotees do not suffer from old age, this is what is referred over here. Because the life of a devotee is one of sense control. So even though old age comes, but the results of the old age do not manifest. Okay, moving on to next verse, 7. Vishrinam swapurim vikshya pratikulan anadritan putran pautrangamatyan jayam cha gatasauradam.
King Puranjana then saw that everything in his town was scattered and that his son, grandson, servant, and ministers were all gradually opposing him. He also noted that his wife was becoming cold and indifferent.
So, pratikulan, it's mentioned pratikulan anadritan. Pratikulan means, anukul means acting favorably, and pratikul means acting adversely. So adversely means, and here it is referring to his sons and grandsons and servants and ministers. Their nature was to serve the king. But now he saw that they were acting against their nature, which means that they were subject to lamentation and other distress. So it's mentioned that anadritam, another means respect, anadritam means disrespect. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that the sons represent discernment and other such qualities. The grandson represent patience and other qualities. the followers are the senses, and the ministers are the controlling deities of the mind and senses. The word cha indicates that they could not at all perform their function, gata saurdam, and as well the wife, which is material intelligence, had no power of apprehension. So he noted his wife was becoming cold and indifferent. So that intelligence that was guiding him for sense enjoyment now became unable to do so. And the various paraphernalia that he had accrued over time, which was patience, discernment, senses, the controlling deities of the mind and the senses, they were all initially working in cadence to facilitate his enjoyment. Now they were acting pratikula. They were acting adversely in the sense that now they were each becoming a cause of his suffering. So it's like one can say that eyes are the source of enjoyment, because through eyes you can see pleasing forms, you can see entertaining activities happening. But when the same eyes become infected, the same eyes become now a source of your suffering, right? Pratikula. So Prabhupada mentions that we wish to use our senses for sense gratification. The senses also require strength from the body. So he says this is a reciprocal arrangement. That the life airs, they provide the vitality to the senses, and the senses in turn nourish the enjoyment of the jiva. So then he said, a man keeps a family for enjoyment, and similarly family members demand enjoyment from the head of the family. So this is the symbiotic relationship, that the head of the family will support the extended family for his own enjoyment, whether it's a sense of pride or control or leaving a legacy. And then on the flip side, the family members, they also expect the head of the family to take care of their needs. Now, when the head of the family is unable to satisfy the needs of the family members, they leave the family head. Right? So essentially the allegory is saying that when the life airs is unable to nourish the senses now stop acting as portals of enjoyment. And Prabhupada said this is all due to one being a kripana, miser. The word kripana used in the 6th verse is the opposite to the word brahmana. Later he says, a miser is one who gets money but does not spend it. Right? And this Prabhupada takes it to represent the jiva getting a human form of body, which is valuable wealth, but does not spend it properly, which is in the pursuit of self-realization. Okay, verse 8. Atmanam kanyaya grastam panchalan naridushitam duranta chintamapano na lebeta pratikriyam.
When King Puranjana saw that all his family members, relatives, followers, servants, secretaries, and everyone else has turned against him, he certainly became very anxious. But he could not counteract the situation because he was thoroughly overwhelmed by Kalakani.
So Vishwanath Chakravarti Pad comments that old age and diseases cannot be cured by medicines or mantras. So if we were to observe the situation in the allegorical story, one may say that if the king is not being supported and respected by those around him, then he should punish them severely and reject them. So Narad Muni is saying that unfortunately, Puranjan could not counteract the situation, which means that he could not punish and reject those who were now disrespecting him because he himself had become weak. So he said, but he could not counteract the situation because he was thoroughly overwhelmed by Kalakanya. So oftentimes people say that there is a time for everything. And the time to pursue spirituality is when you become old, when you retire, your children have been settled, and then you can take to spirituality. But here we see that when one is at that time, then one is surrounded by enemies within and without. And so in the allegory, Puranjan's family member, relatives, followers, servants, secretaries, they have all turned against him. What does it mean? That in old age, for the body, the various senses, the life airs, the ability to engage with the objects, all that has been weakened. And more so if the person has spent a life of sense gratification. That further increases the weakening effect. That's why it is recommended that one should take to spirituality from Lord Kapila actually says that one should take to spirituality from the womb. Should not even wait to take birth. It means that the mother should start introducing the embryo to Krishna consciousness by listening to kirtan or eating prasadam right from the conception. Okay, so we'll do one more verse and then after that we can pause for discussion. Kamanabhila santino yatyamam chakanyaya vigatatma gati sneha putradaram chalalayan.
The objects of enjoyment became stale by the influence of Kalakanya. Due to the continuance of his lust desire, King Puranjana became very poor in everything. Thus, he did not understand the aim of life. He was still very affectionate toward his wife and children, and he worried about maintaining them.
So Prabhupada comments on the external storyline. He says that this is exactly the position of the present civilization, where everyone is engaged in maintaining the body, home, and family. Consequently, everyone becomes confused at the end of life, not knowing what spiritual life and goal of life are. So, this is a very powerful statement Prabhupada makes that that is empirically also can be validated. I remember when my son was in high school, so they have this thing called, I think it's called SS something. So basically, it's social security, social services. So they're supposed to have like 120, 180 hours doing some social service activity, and they have a slew of different activities that they can choose from. And one of the activities is going to an old age home and being with an old person. Most of the time they go and they read. Generally, it's just to give them some company. Most of the time they read, sometimes they'll go and talk, sometimes they'll also help them in simple tasks. Generally, they're not allowed to do any hands-on work there. So when we were looking at that service, so we were talking to other kids who had done that service in the past, and almost all of them said that if you can get some other kind of service, do that. Because going to the old age home, it was so depressing that there are these old people who in their earlier age, they were big people. So they're living in expensive old age homes, so they're obviously rich. They're big people. They were leaders in the companies or successful. And now they're just sitting. Morning to evening, they're just sitting in a room, watching television and cynical, embittered, and very few family members come to visit them. And they're just kind of living in this, literally in a dark world. So the reason is that even though everyone knows that old age is coming, but there is no preparation for it. Everyone assumes that old age is an extension of earlier age. That just like we were enjoying with our senses, just like everybody around us was participating in enjoyment, that's what we'll do. But that does not happen. And in the current day and age, old age can last because people are living longer and longer. People live in this old ages for 25, 30 years. Long time. They live in this abject misery. So Prabhupada, that's why makes this point that consequently everyone becomes confused, not knowing what spiritual life and goal of human life are. Vishwanath Chakravarti comments that even though Puranjan desired to eat, he could not taste or digest. Although he remained affectionate to wife and relatives, they were not affectionate to him. Therefore, he lost the goal of this life, which is enjoyment, and next life, which is more enjoyment, elevation to higher planets. This was Puranjan's goal, not the scriptural goal. So his goal was that I will enjoy in this life and I will get elevated to heavenly planets and enjoy even more. In Leela Amrita, Prabhupada's biography, Prabhupada writes a letter to a government official to get some funding for publishing Back to Godhead. So here he writes that I have got the clue of going back to Godhead just after leaving my present material body. And in order to take along with me all my contemporary men and women of the world, I have started my paper, Back to Godhead, as one of the means to the way. Please don't think of me as something wonderful or a madman when I say that I shall go back to Godhead after leaving my present material body. It is quite possible for everyone and all of us. So, this is a letter written by Prabhupada to Rajendra Prasad, who was then the president of India. And you can see the clarity of the vision and in Prabhupada. Right? He says that I know how to go back to Godhead. And it's not a fantastic thing. I can take others with me back to Godhead. And he says one of the thing is the publishing of the Back to Godhead magazine. And then he asked for donation for that. It's not clear whether he got the donation or not. Prabhupada also prepared a letter for his Western readers. He is suggesting that they should be even more receptive than his countrymen. So he says that although the messages contained in Back to Godhead are all gifts of the ancient sages of India who actually realize the absolute truth, yet at the present moment, the so-called leaders of India are too much enamored by the Western way of material advancement of knowledge. They are completely neglecting the treasure house of knowledge left by the sages. So here he is encouraging them, even though in the country of their origin, this information is being rejected, but does not mean that you cannot avail of it. Okay, so I'll pause here and see that if there's any discussion.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, just a comment. Old age home is a big business in itself, and this is another way. Of course, a lack of information and what is about next life. Nobody knows. That's why this old age home is become big business, because the kids, they at one point in time they just want to get rid of the old people. Oh, they cannot manage, especially in America. Some live here, then another, the parent is in another state. It's very difficult.
Yes, you're right, Prabhu. And I think the interesting point that Prabhupada makes here is using the allegory as a basis, that old age per se is not the cause of this disenchantment with the other family members. It is old age combined with the desire for sense gratification. That's the cause. So the point is making is that if one leads a life of sense control, then that same sense control automatically continues to old age. And then actually then the situation becomes reversed. That such a person actually becomes the object of respect and affection. Okay, so let's continue to verse 10. Gandharva Yavanakrantam Kalakanyopamaditam Atum Prachakrame Raja Tam Puriranikamataha.
The city of King Puranjana was overcome by the Gandharva and Yavana soldiers. And although the king had no desire to leave the city, he was circumstantially forced to do so, for it was smashed by Kalakan.
So this verse talks about the eventual death of the living entity. So it says it was overcome by the Gandharvas and Yavana soldiers. So the Gandharvas, as we know, were representing days and nights. So essentially by the passage of time and by the influence of various kinds of diseases, eventually the body is overcome. So Puranjan was forced to leave. It was smashed by Kalkarni. And so ultimately, old age smashes the body. So Prabhupada makes some very important points in the purport. He says that regardless of the nature of the body and the pain it is causing the living entity, he will remain attached to it. So Prabhupada said this is one of the bewildering things, that by nature's course, as one gets old, because the body becomes a source of pain rather than pleasure, one should become detached from the body. Like sometimes you'll see devotees, especially if they are older and experiencing diseases, then half jokingly they will say, time for a new body. Right? Because it just develops that sense of detachment. But did not happen in case of Puranjan. Why? Prabhupada says power of Maya. And the fact that he lacks information about the next life. So regardless of how strongly the jiva is attached to the body, he will be forced to give it up. But what is the result of this strong attachment? He will be forced to take on another material body. Because attachment is to a body, any body. And he cannot remain attached to, in case a person has excessive attachment to his own body, in some cases they become ghosts. So they refuse to take another body because they're excessively attached to their previous body, and which is considered more to be an aberration. But otherwise, because they're attached to the material body, they will continue to take on more and more material bodies. In contrast, a devotee is only attached to the body because it is a means to serve the Lord. So they're never scared of giving up the body because they're confident that they will get another body even more suitable for service. So these 2 points Prabhupada makes for devotees, that a devotee is attached to the body, but not because the body is a source of enjoyment, but because it is an instrument for service. So we see in Prabhupada's own life that he took good care of his body. When Prabhupada had a heart attack in New York, and he was taken to the hospital, then the doctor over there said, he said the old man prays too much. He should go out and walk. And Prabhupada took those instructions to heart. And every day, without fail, whether it was raining or whether it was hot or it was cold, once, I think it was in Boston, Prabhupada, morning he dressed up, he said, let's go for a walk. And it was, Boston is cold, it was snowing outside. And the disciple said, Prabhupada, it's a really miserable day outside. Do you really want to go for a walk? And Prabhupada says, the day is not miserable, you are miserable. Let's go. And everybody went with Prabhupada. So we see that Prabhupada took good care of his body. He was, when he went to see the Ayurvedic doctor, he recommended massage, and scrupulously Prabhupada had the massage done. But then we also see in his Antalila that he was very detached. So he would very dispassionately comment on the fact that I have maybe so many months to live. And he was making all arrangements, establishing the trusteeship, etc. So he was very matter of fact about the fact that he will soon be giving up his body. So that's the mood of a devotee. So devotees, sometimes we use these terms to emphasize to ourselves about the fact that we are using our bodies to serve the Lord. Right? So we don't say a devotee is sleeping. We say a devotee is resting. So what does it mean? That the devotee is resting the body so that the body can be rejuvenated and continue in the service. A devotee is sleeping to some extent means that either the person is enjoying sleep or under the influence of sleep. But when you say is resting, then the connotation is that the body is exhausted, so it is being given rest so that it can once again resume its service. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that this movement is giving human society information about the kingdom of God. There is God, there is Krishna, and everyone can return to God and live eternally in bliss and knowledge. A Krishna conscious person is not afraid of giving up his body because his position is always eternal. A Krishna conscious person engages in the transcendental loving service of the Lord eternally. So Prabhupada is here contrasting the difference between a devotee and a person who is materially attached. And essentially he says the difference is that they do not have knowledge. They do not know what their position is and what will happen to them after they die. Okay, verse 11. Bhayo namno vrajo vrata prajvara pratiyupshitaha dadahatam purim kritashnam bratau priya chikeshaya.
Under the circumstances, the elder brothers of Yavanaraj, known as Prithvara, set fire to the city to please his younger brother, whose other name is fear itself.
So Prajvara represents various kinds of diseases. And he is called the elder brother of Yavan. So Yavanraj is fear or fear of death. It's called Mrityu or Bhaya. Essentially is fear of death. So diseases appear before death appears. So that's why Prajvara is considered to be the elder brother of Yavanraj. Prabhupada mentions that according to the Vedic system, a dead body is set on fire. But before death, there is another fire, which is called Prajvar or Vishnujvara. Medical science verifies that when temperature is raised to 107 degrees, a man immediately dies. This Prajvar or high fever at the last stage of life places the living entity in the midst of a blazing fire. Okay, next verse 12. Tasyam sandhayamanayam sapurasa parichadaha kautumbikaha putambinya upatapyata sanvayaha.
When the city was set ablaze, all the citizens, the servant of the king, as well as all family members, son, grandson, wife, and other relatives were within the fire. King Puranjana thus became very unhappy.
So the citizens are essentially the seven dhatus or the coverings of the material body. And the servants are the senses. Kautumbikaha means one who enjoys with his wife. And the descendants are the sons and grandsons. So here it is said that he suffered along with his intelligence. So Prabhupada says there are many parts of the body, the senses, the limbs, the skin, the muscle, blood, marrow, etc., All these are considered here figuratively as sons, grandsons, citizens, and dependents. When the body is attracted by Vishnu Jwar, the fiery condition becomes so acute that sometimes one remains in a coma. This means that the body is in such severe pain that one becomes unconscious and cannot feel the miseries taking place within the body. Indeed, the living entity becomes so helpless at the time of death that although unwilling, he is forced to give up the body and enter another. So these verses are describing the situation at the moment of death. What is that? So far, the verses were describing leading to death, which was essentially old age. Now, Narad is describing the actual, what is happening at the time of death. Okay, verse 13. Yavano parudhayan yatanno grastayam kalakanyaya puryam prajvara samshritaha purpalo navatapyata.
The city superintendent of police, the serpent, saw that the citizens were being attacked by Kalakanya, and he became very aggrieved to see his own residence set ablaze after being attacked by the Yavanas.
So the protector of the city is the seven-headed serpent. Right? So he's also called here the superintendent of police, because the police protects the city, and they essentially represent the life heirs. And the life heirs, they are part of the subtle body. So essentially, it is the life heirs that connect the spiritual body with the gross body, because they're essentially different. Like it is said, there is water and oil. That water and oil, they can never mix. You can put them side by side for as long as you want, but they'll never mix. But then the chemists, they use a special substance known as an emulsifier. And the emulsifier basically has the unique property that it looks a little bit like water and a little bit like oil. So the oil mixes with it, thinking that it is oil, and the water mixes with it, thinking that it's water. And essentially, it causes the mixing of water and oil. So similarly, this subtle body, it acts as an emulsifier. That the spiritual body has nothing to do with the material body, but at one point, the subtle body, through the agency of the mind, interacts with the gross senses, and at the other point, through the most subtle aspect of the subtle body is false ego. So through the false ego, it interacts with the spirit soul, and that's how it binds the soul with the gross body. So in addition to this binding of desires, there is also a physical binding by which the spirit soul that is within the subtle body is bound to the gross body, and that is done through the life heirs. So as we know, the yogis, one of the siddhis that they have is that they can break this life heirs temporarily. So then the subtle body, it becomes free of the gross body, and then they can travel. So the subtle body is no longer subject to the laws of the gross material nature. So it can travel at the speed of thought, and it can witness things that are beyond the ability of the gross body to travel. It can go to different planetary systems, etc. And then, of course, they are able to re-establish the life heir, which again connects the gross body and the subtle body. At the time of death, the life heirs are weakened to the point that the subtle body it breaks free of the gross body. And then it is the subtle body that carries the spirit soul to the next gross body, where it once again is bound by the life force. Prabhupada says that the subtle body has been figuratively described as a serpent or the city's police superintendent. Later he says, as the life air is ready to leave the gross body, the subtle body also began to experience pain because it had become attached to the gross body, living there for the duration of that life. Okay, verse 14. Nasheke sovitam tatra Guru Krachro Ruvepatu Gantum Mecha Tato Vriksha Otara.
As a serpent living within the cavity of a tree wishes to live when there is a forest fire, so the city's police superintendent, the snake, wished to leave the city due to the fire, severe heat.
Prabhupada says it becomes very difficult for the snake to leave a forest when there is fire. Other animals may flee due to the long legs, but serpents, only being able to crawl, are generally burnt in the fire. At the last stage, the limbs of the body are not as much affected as the life air. Okay, next verse, 50. Stila vayavyoyarhi gandharver hitapaurusha yavanera virajan upruddo ruruddaha.
The limbs of the serpent body were slackened by the Gandharvas and Yavana's soldiers, who had thoroughly defeated his bodily strength. When he attempted to leave the body, he was checked by his enemy. Being thus baffled in his attempt, he began to cry loudly.
So Prabhupada says that at the last stage of life, the different gates of the body are choked by the effects of diseases, which are caused by the imbalance of bile, mucus, and air. Thus, the living entity cannot clearly express his difficulties, and surrounding relatives hear the sound gura gura from a dying man. So these verses are describing in details the actual leaving of the body. So at one stage, the body has become uninhabitable. But at the other stage, the jiva is having difficulty even leaving the body. So it's kind of like you're in a house, the house is on fire, but because the house is on fire, the entrances are on fire, there is smoke everywhere. So you would like to leave the house, but you cannot. So ultimately, the house will burn down and you'll be forced to leave. But this is indicating the final moments of death when the soul is experiencing intense amount of discomfort, both in being in the body and in its attempt to try and leave the body. So Prabhupada quotes King Kulashekara. He was one of the famous Alvars. So he wrote the Mukundamala Stotra. And Prabhupada quotes this verse, which is one of Prabhupada's favorite, actually, where King Kulashekara prays that, "O Krishna, please allow my mind to immediately yield to your lotus flower-like feet, just as the flamingo enters into the labyrinth of the lotus flower stems. when at the moment of my last breath, my throat becomes constricted by the action of the bodily humors, air, bile, and phlegm, how will I be able to remember you? So here the king is praying. Now, of course, he is a pure devotee, so this will not happen to him. But he's, out of humility, taking the position of a materialistic person and saying that at the moment of death, it is difficult to remember Krishna because the jiva is so bewildered. I remember, and this probably happens to almost everybody, that when they read the Yam Yam Apisparan Bhavam, the verse in the 8th chapter, and then everybody will, at one time or the other, ask, then isn't it simpler just to remember Krishna at the time of death than go through a whole lifetime of following the 4 regulative principles, chanting, doing this and that? And this is the answer to that. That only after a lifetime of practice can you remember Krishna at the time of death. Because at the time of death, the jiva is completely bewildered. So, Prabhupada, he really, especially Mukundmala Stotra. Mukundmala Stotra, essentially it's translates as a collection of flowers to Mukunda versus a flower. King Kulakshetra, he appeared in the Sri Sampradaya. And there's 12 alvars. And they're essentially Tamil devotional poets. And they devoted their lives to they composed mostly through singing and chanting the glories of the Lord. The Kulakshetra is one of the 12 alvar. And his style was writing in very simple Sanskrit, expressing his devotion to the Lord. Mukundmala Stotra, Prabhupada wanted to translate it, so he translated the first 6 verses. And then after that, he wanted to focus on the Bhagavatam. So he left it at that point, hoping to return to it sometime later on, but that did not happen. So according to some acharyas, Mukundmala Sutra has either 40 verses or 53 verses or 60 verses. And the list of the verses are there, but different scholars consider different parts of those verses as part of the Mukundmala. So this particular verse, which is actually verse 33, Prabhupada quotes this very often, and he used to sing it also. Actually, Prabhupada sang this particular verse in his recordings, and RKC radio in Italy, it uses this recording as a soundbite in its playing there. Not sure if it still does that, but at one point the radio was using Prabhupada's recording of this verse as music. And there is also a wonderful recording by Mahatma Prabhu in his album Our Only Shelter. He sings the Mukundmala. He actually sings this verse in this recording. Prabhupada says, commenting on this verse, that if in our healthy conditions we think of the lotus feet of the Lord and die, it is most fortunate. This is the prayer of King Kulakshetra. In old age, at the time of death, the throat sometimes becomes choked with mucus or blocked by air. At that time, the sound vibration of Hare Krishna Mahamantra may not come out. Thus, one may forget Krishna. Of course, those who are strong in Krishna consciousness cannot possibly forget Krishna at any stage of life because they are accustomed to chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, especially when there is a signal from death. In Sri Sampradaya, there are 3 Charma shlokas. Charma shlokas are considered to be climax verses or ultimate verses. So in Sri Sampradaya, they consider 3 to be the essential verses of their Sampradaya. So the first is from Bhagavad Gita, the 1866 Sarvadharam Pratyajaya. The second verse is actually from Ramayana, which talks about it's the verse Lord Ram speaks when Vibhishan surrenders unto him. So it talks about the unconditional protection of the Lord to one who surrenders to him. I don't know that verse or where it comes from. And the third Charma Shlok is from Varaha Charma, and it talks about Krishna's assurance that at the time of leaving, if somebody is unable to remember him for some reason, then he says that I will remember the devotee. So if the devotee is unable to remember me, then I will remember that devotee. So this is Krishna's assurance given to devotees, right? Because devotees will also die. Will also go through the same kind of tribulation. But Krishna gives this assurance. Sometimes people ask that, what if the devotees have an accident and they die all of a sudden and they're not able to chant? Or they go into coma, and once they go to coma, then who knows what's going on? So in the Varaha Charma Shlok, Krishna gives this assurance that at the time of leaving his body, if he is unable to remember me for some reasons, then I will remember the devotee and I will bring him back to my abode. So sometime back, there was a plane crash in Nepal, and there were devotees who were traveling on it and they died. So at the memorial of those devotees, this verse was quoted, the third verse. Okay, we'll do one more verse and after that we'll pause for any discussion. Duhitra putra pautramscha jami jamatra parshadam satva visheshatam yat kinchid grahakosha parichadam.
King Puranjana then began to think of his daughters, son, grandson, daughters-in-law, son-in-law, servants, and other associates, as well as his house, his household paraphernalia, and his little accumulation of wealth.
Vishwanath Chakravarti comments on this verse. He says, Jami means daughter-in-law, daughters-in-law, and Pramadya Viprayoga Upshita means when separated from a woman. So Chakravarti makes the point that the wife over here does not refer to his intelligence, because he has started the allegories considering that his wife was his material intelligence. But he said here it actually refers to the wife. It does not refer to his intelligence, because when the gross body of the jiva is destroyed, the intelligence is not destroyed. It is subtle. So there is no separation of the jiva from the intelligence. So then one can understand that this refers to the conditional jiva's normal material life, and talks about his objects of attachment and enjoyment by the senses. Similarly, the daughters that are mentioned in this verse are also conventional daughters and relatives. They are not symbols in the spiritual metaphor. Then Chakravarti say that some say that at the time of death, the jiva thinks of his wife and sons not of intelligence, discernment, and other elements. Others say that dharmic intelligence was previously represented by wife Puranjani, But at the time of death, there is no separation of dharmic intelligence and joining with other intelligence. There are statements such as Na maya anasita bhunkte. His wife would not take her dinner until he had finished. This refers to a time before the separation from his dharmic intelligence. This will be explained later. The description in this work presents the idea, I am not satisfied with my actions of dharma. What should I do? Death is now approaching. Right? So Vishnu Chakravarti says that when Narad Muni is talking about daughters, sons, grandsons, wife, etc., this is representing the actual daughters or wife and son, etc., and could not be considered to be a metaphor. And essentially, what King Puranjan is thinking that I have yet not fully enjoyed with them. I have yet not created a proper environment for them to flourish. So everybody wants to leave a legacy, whether it is wealth or teaching or good standing. So he's saying that I have not. So that's why he's getting bewildered, that I'm dying, but I have not yet fully taken care of my family. Prabhupada says it is not infrequent for a person overly attached to the material body to request a physician to prolong his life at least for some time. If the so-called physician is able to prolong one's life for a few minutes through the use of oxygen or other medicine, he thinks that he is very successful in his attempts, although ultimately the patient will die. This is called the struggle for existence. At the time of death, both patient and physician still think of prolonging life, although all the constituents of the body are practically dead and gone. Okay, so I'll stop here and see if there is any discussion.
I just want to make one comment. You quoted Yam Yam Bhakti.
And can't hear you, Prabhu. Very faintly, I'm able to hear you.
You quoted just 1 second. Are you hearing? Everyone hearing, please?
Now I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, so you're quoting the Yam Yam Vapi Smaran Bhavat, whatever state of being one is at the time of giving up the body, that state he attains after. And then you also quoted, well, if you know, if we can't remember Krishna at the time of death, then, you know, according to the Sri Sampradaya, Krishna will remember us. And you're mentioning one in a state of coma, or suddenly, you know, one ends up in a crash and you can't recall. But there was something very, very interesting that I read in a scientific journal, a discovery just earlier this year, where it was said that when the heart stops beating, they did some experiment with whatever the scientists, and they found that although one is pronounced clinically dead, that the brain keeps going for another 15 minutes. And it was the first time they were able to let's say track, you know, the activity on the, you know, on the brain. And they found also something very intriguing that I'm reading here. Based on what they saw in the recording, the researchers say that the brain may actually play a recall of important events in our lives when we die. It's an interesting concept, and one that may have that many have believed for years. So I reflected on this, and I was reflecting all that you said, and I thought that how kind Krishna is, that even though, coma, or, the heart stops beating, according to what is described here, Krishna is giving us like another 15 minutes, to just focus on him. And there's something in psychology called the law of last thought also, which says basically that when one is going through a very traumatic experience, just like one place it is said that the death is so terrible, it's like so many scorpion is biting, it is so painful and like that. So I was just reflecting that in that critical moment, Krishna is giving us this little period. The principle of last thought says that the things that we like and the things that we do that pleases us or give us the greatest pleasure in life, those are the things that we focus on. So I was thinking that if in our whole life we are just absorbed in Bhakti, Krishna devotional service and like that, then naturally the mind will just go on those things, right? Even though the heart stops beating and clinically dead, that little 15 minutes there that they're talking about here, right? And again, I'm repeating how kind Krishna is. That's my little comment when I read this some time back. It was just like early in this year the scientists found this out. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Prabhu. And I agree. It is it is fascinating and comforting also that when we get this sense that science is catching up to what is being said in the scriptures. So sometimes back one would not be able to accept this, but now there is more and more scientific sustenance being given to these things that have been stated in the Vedas since time immemorial. Gives a lot of faith when you speak about this to other people who are looking for some outside corroboration, and to us also, as you were mentioning, that if we train our mind, then even though we may be clinically pronounced dead, but we know that if our mind is trained, then it can have this opportunity to once again focus on Krishna. 15 minutes is a good amount of time. You can chant at least 2 rounds during that time.
I'll post that. I'll post it on our chat, on our WhatsApp chat. I'll post. It's about 2 or 3 paragraphs, but I'll post exactly what the finding was.
Yes, please. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, if not, we'll end here. Panchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.